Hi, welcome to our tour today of Falmouth's historical churches. We are going to meet here in the courthouse parking lot, and this is where we'll start from. We're going to end close to this spot. Before we start, I need to tell you that I defined historical as being a church building that's architecture was historical in nature, a congregation that's still in existence, that has been around for a long time, in most of these cases, a century or longer, or a church building or a church congregation that was here a long time ago, but is no longer here. I will not be stopping at every church in the town. However, I'm going to hit most of them, as most of our buildings or congregations are historical in nature. Right here next to the parking lot is our first stop, St. Paul's Lutheran Church. It was a German Lutheran church located on Chapel and 2nd. It was built around 1871 and dedicated on April 21st, 1872. An excursion train left the depot in Cincinnati that morning at 8 o'clock. That was a Sunday morning, and it headed to Falmouth and returned to Cincinnati in the evening, leaving Falmouth at 5 o'clock. The original church records were kept in German. Baptismal and death records for this church can be found online at Pendleton County's Roots website. They are in English. Some of the surnames in this congregation were Bentel, Brandt, Rosenstiel, Doms, Ritter, Reber, and Ruber, Zimter, Marquette, Brill, Bob, Hess, Wagner, Apple, Haberer, and Stump. A lot of those names are very familiar even today. During World War I, this building was used as City Hall while they were constructing what was going to become their new City Hall. At some point in time, the Church of the Nazarene met here, and currently the building houses the Pendleton County Sheriff's Office. We're going to make a right here by the building, and we're going to head toward the river. When you see this sign, it's the Birds War Road marker and the sugar pie sign with the arrow. We're going to follow that arrow, okay, basically down the street there to the location on the riverbank of two churches in Pendleton County. This site where you see the White House that sits on the riverbank there, somewhere on that property was the site of the First Catholic Church in Falmouth. The cornerstone for this first church was laid in 1857. Falmouth at that time was being attended every 2 months from Paris. It was in use from about 1860 until 1880. Between 1880 and 1885, Miss Jane Tomlinson conducted a private school for the children of the parish in this building. Later on, it was rented out to be what they used to term a colored school. So it was a segregated school for the Black children in the city. The Baptist Church had their first building somewhere in this area. We don't know where, but it was located near the point of the South Fork and the main licking, and that we are right here at the point. It was a log structure and was built around 1801. We're going to head back down 2nd Street in the direction that we just came from. And we're going to stop at the present day St. Francis Xavier Catholic Church. It's located on 2nd and Chapel across the street from the German Lutheran Church. Falmouth, Foster's Landing, Dividing Ridge, Stepstone, Double Beach, and Butler, 6 different areas in Pendleton County, each had Catholic churches or missions. As early as 1851, Falmouth was assisted by missionary priests from Frankfort and Lexington. However, tombstones in the cemetery located on Woodson Road date back as far as 1840. So that indicates that there were at least Catholic families living in or around Falmouth, and may even be an indication of an early church established here. The early congregation was predominantly Irish. The current building was built between 1877 and 1880, and it is an example of Romanesque revival architecture. The train on the Kentucky Central Railroad ran an excursion for the dedication of the building. You could catch the train in Cincinnati on the morning of Sunday, the 21st of October, 1877, and you could travel to Falmouth on the railroad for the ceremonies, and you could return that evening for $1. The round trip cost you $1. The ceremonies centered on the laying of the cornerstone for the new building. Since then, the church building has undergone several renovations. The 3 bells in the tower were installed in 1888. Sometime between 1911 and 1917, the stained glass windows were installed. The educational building and the rectory were added in 1961. And the organ was installed in 1965, and it was saved from demolition of the Villa Madonna Academy in Covington. We'll continue on down 2nd Street. We're going to go to the corner of 2nd and Montjoy. This location served 2 churches. The original church was built on land owned by Charity Southgate. It's a vacant lot today. Charity was born in Loudoun County, Virginia, to a white woman named Patsy Palmer and a black house servant in Patsy's brother-in-law's home. Robert Foster was the brother-in-law's name. Charity, on the basis that her mother was white, was not to be enslaved, but that's exactly what happened when she came to Falmouth. So she sued for her freedom, and she eventually won it in 1820. Then she began, shortly after that, and after she was able to get her children freed, she began purchasing lots in town. Most of those lots were in this area. Actually, I think all of them were in this area that she purchased. And she used one of these for the site of the first church. In this picture, you can see the house on the right is her house, and the house on the left would have been where the church was. So after her death in about 1865, 1868, somewhere around there, her children sold and deeded their shares to their brother, William Southgate. And in 1874, he deeded the land to the church. This deed noted that the building was already there. We don't know when it was built, but we do know that it was there by that time. AME churches were known for their work in helping enslaved people escape slavery. Looking at, where the river is, the railroad bridge going over the river. So the fact that the railroad is here, the church is here, the river is here, the river and the railroad provided a means of escape. And then you have the church to provide assistance. It's really not far to reach back and to believe that Charity and the members of the church were involved in the Underground Railroad. We don't have proof, but we're working on it. We'll get there one day. The church moved to the location across the street, probably in the late 20s, early 30s. This land, the markers all the way down to the corner of Montjoy, had been owned by Alvin Montjoy originally. He was the first owner, and it stayed in the family until this time of the late 20s. The heirs then deeded the land and the cemetery to the city. It was after that point that the city deeded the lot to the church, with the caveat that if the church ceased to exist, the land would revert back to the city. And toward the end of the Allen Chapel, they merged with Trinity Southern Baptist Church, and both churches as a united congregation used this building. It was their first home. When there was no longer a church here, the property was sold again by the trustees of the AME Church and the city, and the new owners became the American Legion Post 109. The ad that ran in the paper right after that sale, Sonny Wilson Realty had the auction. It was held on July 27, 1985, and was purchased for $15,000. On toward the bottom of this advertisement, it states that the church was operated and used by Allen Chapel for at least 75 to 90 years. In 1982, it was occupied by Trinity. So I think their years are a little bit off based on the sale, unless the Montjoy heirs had already allowed them to use that land as well. We're going to turn around and walk back up 2nd Street to Maple Avenue, and we're going to turn right on Maple Avenue. When we get to the corner of Maple and Shelby, we're going to stop. This is the site of the Falmouth Methodist Church, or Mary's Chapel as it's known. This is the oldest church building still in use in Falmouth. The land was donated by Paul C. Lair of Falmouth, and it's located on this corner, which was at that time known as Upper Mill, which is Maple, and Main Cross, which is Shelby. The church initially met in its members' homes, and then it moved to the courthouse. It was known as the Methodist Society when it first began. The congregation was a member of the Cynthiana Circuit, and in 1832, it became part of the Falmouth Circuit. The building was built by Augustus Robbins. Robbins was the first miller in town. In 1854, in memory of his wife, Mary Fraser Robbins, who was a sister to Paul Lair's wife, Robbins built this building. Robbins also had a pork packing plant near the courthouse, and he shipped pork by flatboat to New Orleans. He made a lot of money doing this, so he felt the need to share his good fortune with the community. That along with wanting to honor his wife, were his reasons behind building this church. According to church records, the church building was completed by Lair and Robbins together with the help of other members of the congregation. It was a one-story building at that time, having one entrance with a small vestibule, and that entrance was facing Shelby Street, what's now Shelby Street. It was headed by a stove in the center of the room with an organ and a choir on one side. The furnishings of the building were left to the congregation to purchase. Dedication service was conducted by Bishop Hubbard H. Kavanaugh in 1855, and Bishop Kavanaugh still has descendants in the area today. That's why I wanted to mention him. The building was remodeled for the first time in 1890 and was dedicated in 1891. At this time, the vestibule was removed, and these 3 windows in the front of the building were added on with art glass. Other windows in the church were also replaced with art glass to match, so that they would match the front 3. At this time, they also built 2 vestibules, one on each side of the building, so which creates the 2 entrances that are still present today. You see the one opening out on Maple Avenue here, and then the other one is on around kind of in an alleyway there next to the other building. It was remodeled again in 1926 and dedicated in 1927. This time the building was enlarged by several feet to make room to seat the choir behind the pulpit and to create a pastor's study to the right of the pulpit. The upper story with Sunday school rooms, kitchen, and dining room were added, and a water heating system was installed at that time. A balcony was also built in the rear of the church, which increased the seating capacity to about 350. The belfry was added to the top of the church at this time. The Methodist and the Presbyterian congregations were very closely connected. At times, they shared pastors. They even shared buildings during periods of remodeling. During the last remodel, the Methodist Church used the Presbyterian building for their services. And when the Presbyterian Church disbanded, they donated their bell to the Methodist Church for their bell tower. And we will talk about the Presbyterian Church later. They disbanded in 1932. So we had, the Methodist Church had a bell tower without a bell for a few years in there. Diagonally across the street from the Methodist Church is the Falmouth Christian Church. This church was built during the years of 1872 to 1876 under the direction of Thomas Jefferson, or T.J. Oldham. It was started in 72, but the congregation had some financial difficulties, and so that's why it took 4 years to finish. You can see the river is beyond those poles and the tree line there. We can also swing on around and you will see the building was in January of 1876. For a while, the Christian church here at Falmouth met in the Baptist church building on 4th and Chapel, which was later a movie theater, and I'm going to remind you of that when we get there. In 1855, L.P. Fryer, who was an attorney in Pendleton County, reported that a regularly organized congregation of the Christian church was meeting at the courthouse. So the congregation dates back to at least 1855. The stained glass windows were added sometime after 1900. Prior to 1950, the ladies of the church served by forming two organizations, the Ladies' Aid Society and the Missionary Society. The Ladies' Aid raised funds for local projects and church projects. The Missionary Society raised funds for state and foreign missions. Organizations were merged, and the Christian Women's Fellowship was organized in July of 1950. If we walk around to the right of the building, there is a carriage house back here. This was built when the property was owned by Theo Bradford. Bradford was a Falmouth businessman, and this was built as a playhouse for his daughter. We're going to walk back around to the other side of the church, and we will see a monument there in honor of Alan Pop. He was known as Pop Jameson. He was a leader in the YMCA and later the Boy Scouts of America. Albert A. Jameson, 1868 to 1944. Born in Falmouth, March 5th, 1868, A.A. Jameson attended this church from 1873 to 1885. As an early camp expert with the YMCA, he became a prominent figure with the Boy Scouts of America. He was one of 3 men on the 1911 editorial board for the very first Boy Scout handbook for boys. As of this dedication to this monument in 1998, the handbook was in its 10th edition and had sold over 37 million printings. We are now going to make a right, and we're going to walk down to the next corner, which is the present site of the Falmouth Baptist Church. It is on 4th and Maple. This is among the oldest Baptist congregations in Kentucky. Depending on the source, 15 or 16 members of Bryan Station Church in Fayette County met in 1792 and formed this church. At that time, it was known as the Baptist Church of Jesus Christ at the Forks of the Licking. Falmouth was known as the Forks of the Licking at that time. The members obtained permission from Bryan Station Church to form here because, one, they had a 60-mile journey to get to Bryan Station, and they had to go through Indian Territory to get there. The hardship and the danger they faced in making this trip necessitated, they felt, starting a church here in Falmouth. Alexander Monroe, the elder, was the minister. He served the church from 1797 until 1825. It's believed that the church first met in the homes of its members. And depending on which history you read, the church changed its name to Falmouth Baptist around 1880. Could have been as early as 1878. The church acquired this property where it is and where the parsonage is standing. The parsonage is the first house right behind the building. And they got this in 1909. Harriet Blackaby, a member of the church, bequeathed this site to them. And in return, the church agreed to pay her estate's indebtedness, which was about $500, and to tend to her grave for 5 years. The property value at the time was approximately $1,500. The church is built in classic revival architecture and was designed by John Gillig of Lexington, who also designed the Falmouth Deposit Bank. That bank no longer exists, but it is across the street from the post office. Daugherty Lumber Company built this building at a cost of $31,622, and the construction on it began in 1924. Despite the building being built during the Great Depression, the building was dedicated on the 16th of February, 1930. In July of 1932, the church was forced to accept 25 cents on the dollar for their savings in the Pendleton Bank. The bank failed that year. sold their old church building that year for $1,250. The education building was added on in 1954, and it's to the right of the building. This was the last place the church built. We've already visited the first place that they built a building that was on the riverbank. After they left the riverbank, we're going to move on down the street to the next place they met. They did not build a building here. This block was the home of the Pendleton Academy. It became the home of the Baptist Church in 1820. They used the old seminary building for that, and they continued to meet here for about 35 years. If we continue on toward Main Street, we will stop here on the corner of 4th and Chapel. This was the second building. So this came after the 35 years at Pendleton Academy when they built this one. They authorized the construction of this building in 1854, and the building was dedicated in 1861 at the beginning of the Civil War. It's likely that the church met through August of 1861 here, but we do know that from September of 1861 through June of 1862, that there was no meeting held each month. It's noted in the minutes of the church. There was nothing else in the minutes until you get to the 10th of December, 1864. At this time, the minutes noted that the Baptist Church of Jesus Christ at the Forks of the Licking met on the second Saturday in December, 1864, and was again organized for business. So that kind of indicates that they did not meet after June of 1862 until pretty much the end of the war. We were just months away. This is the location that the Falmouth Christian Church also met. I told you I would remind you when we got here. So at this point, we're going to turn around and we're going to walk back toward the current Baptist Church, and we're going to turn on Chapel. About halfway down the block on the left, and this block goes between 4th and Chapel and Shelby, we will come to the Presbyterian Church. The Presbyterian Church was founded on the 5th day of December, 1829. Its elders were James Naylor and Deval Payne Jr. The groundbreaking ceremony for this building, however, was not held until the 14th of September, 1872. So that indicates that the church met somewhere else prior to September of 1872. Most likely they met in the homes of other church members. The cornerstone was laid by the Masonic Lodge during the groundbreaking ceremony. Due to the late time of year, that was as far as it went until, as far as construction goes, until the 27th of April in 1873. D.E. Redmond contracted to lay the brick at $6 per measure and did the work himself. We have a close-up here of the brick, so you can see that, they are definitely old brick, probably fired locally because of transporting them so far would have been very difficult. The building was completed by and dedicated on the 11th of January of 1874. And the church continued until the 2nd of December, 1932. At that time, they disbanded and joined with the Presbyterian Church at Concord. They sold this building to the Masons for $1,500, and it's been their lodge ever since. The church at the time of the sale to the Masons was a racially integrated church. Member Thornton Holmes, who was a man of color, was among those recorded in the church minutes as agreeing to the sale of the building to the Orion or the Masonic Lodge. Others listed in that agreement were Dr. and Mrs. J.E. Wilson, H.A. Fabra, Mr. and Mrs. George Held, Ella and Mary Wilson, Bess and Daisy Frazier, Mrs. Hetty Davis, Sam Rosensteel, and Ruth Fabra. We'll turn around. We're going to head back the direction we came. We'll make a left on 4th Street. We're going to cross over Main and continue down 4th Street until we get to Beach. Beach, we're going to make a left, and we will visit the site of the First Baptist Church. The First Baptist Church appears on the Atlas of Bracken and Pendleton counties, dated in 1884. I call it a precinct map. So if you've ever heard me talk about the 1884 precinct map, this is what I'm talking about. You can see the location of the church here. It's in the red block. This is the same location that it's in today. We know from this map that the church was there in 1884. We don't know when the congregation was actually established or when that building was built. The original building was still standing in 1968, and it was destroyed by the tornado that came through this section and hit this section of the town particularly hard. It was rebuilt shortly afterwards, and we have a picture here of Miss Nellie Palmer standing in front of the rebuilt building. She was a member of the Ruth's Temple, and we're going there next, and was a well-known and well-loved person around town. She was very active in the effort to get First Baptist Church rebuilt after its destruction. There were 2 AME churches and First Baptist who were all functioning Black churches at the same time. They joined in a cooperative spirit with each other. They helped each other with fundraising, with homecomings, various church meetings, and other projects. At times they shared buildings even. Mrs. Palmer was known for her excellent fried chicken that went into many box meals and dinners held by these churches. Various articles in the paper show that the church has extended invitations to white congregations to attend their special events, and those articles also noted that the whites were known to accept the offer. On down Beach Street, as we're getting closer to Shelby, second to the last house on the left, was the home of Ruth's Temple. This church escaped destruction during the 1968 tornado, but the congregants here were very instrumental in helping First Baptist up the road a little bit, rebuild, as I've already mentioned. Ruth's Temple held a homecoming in August of 1966. And the article in the paper reported that visitors came as far as Michigan and Ohio, as well as from Cynthiana, Paris, and Lexington to attend this event. Donations were accepted to help fund the homecoming, and the Falmouth Rotary Club donated money, as did several individuals. Woodhead Funeral Home provided the folding chairs, and the ladies of St. James AME Church from a nearby neighborhood came also to help with the meal. This made it a truly community effort. So in addition to Mrs. Palmer, Mrs. Hattie Price, and Mrs. Grace Graves also volunteered much of their time to this church. We're now about 4 blocks maybe from where we started. And this concludes our tour of Falmouth's historical churches. In all, we have visited 12 different locations of these 9 different churches. I thank you so much for joining me today. I hope that you have enjoyed our tour.